Welcome back to A Bite from the Money Sandwich, where we provide practical and easy to understand tips and ideas on how to manage your money better so as to let you retire with comfort and on your own terms. As we approach retirement, having enough money is an important consideration, but it's not the only one. Your health, your relationships, and what your next big challenge will be are just as important. Another consideration is where you're going to live. And for many, they are considering a sea change or tree change and getting away from the big smoke. So it's wonderful to have Chris and Wendy Sparks here today to share their interesting story, where they were able to not only make the sea change, but worked how to still run a successful business remotely as they continued through to retirement. Well, welcome, Chris and Wendy, and thanks for being on the show.
G'day, Mark. Good to be here.
Very nice to be here.
A nice place probably to start was, because I've known you both for over 20 years, and I know that you've worked in small and large businesses and worked very hard at what you do. Probably when was the time that you thought, okay, had enough of this, I want to start slowing down, or even as you did, move out of Sydney?
Mate, for me, I live a very odd life. I tend not to make great long-term plans, and people find that a bit hard to believe. Life's full of opportunities, and I think the most adventure you can have is when you go and grab them. We ended up down here because we were coming to visit a brother, and we saw a real estate sign. That was 2007. Yeah, 2007. So that was the kind of carrot. I'd just finished up a senior executive role with a US corporate and was basically taking a year off. Wendy was still working, but she could work at a distance in our small business Seating Dynamics.
And I was still nursing back then. Yeah.
And, so we did a little bit of camping around New South Wales and stumbled upon this property and saw it. And that was what kind of charted our direction, I suppose. We knew we were going to eventually end up down here.
And why the country? And I suppose you are near water, so but you're not on so there's a sea change or tree change. But we're seeing with COVID how many people are now thinking about doing this. But yes, you did this a fair while ago. But why get out of Sydney?
I think we both we took the opportunity when we saw a block of land for sale. It was waterfront, and I love to fish. We both loved kayaking, both loved camping, so it seemed like an idea to buy. We weren't set on settling down here, so we sort of put an offer in and the guy rejected it at first. So it took probably a year or so from when we first put an offer in before we got rung up and still bought the block for the same price we put the first offer in, because we refused to budge because we weren't sure what we were going to do at that time. We were travelling around.
Mate, I also think too, Sydney has become increasingly unlivable. We're based out of Cherrybrook, and this is before the Hills rail system was ever looked like being a reality. And, the only real option for us to get around was motorcars. And working in and around Sydney was just becoming untenable for me. If I had a 9:30 appointment, I had no idea what time I had to leave home to get there. The traffic was just so bad and getting worse. And I think it's compounded ever since. So it was a bit of lifestyle. It was a bit of adventure. And I think overall we're really happy with the decision we made. We're also fortunate in that we were still able to work. I established a small consulting business and we picked up a number of clients, and that kept ticking along really nicely. And to this day, we still do a little bit of dabbling.
Yeah, you're always ahead of your time in that regard, because you were working remotely before, since 2020, when people were forced to work remotely, and it's now become the preferable way to work going forward, I believe. So what did, you're on this farm down, how far? Probably 5-7 hours from Sydney?
About 5.5 hours from Sydney.
5.5 hours from Sydney. The whole thing with having the internet having to use a laptop on a farm. How was all that to try and when you started out?
Well, the most challenging, because we spent a few years designing our home, and we put a small cabin, I'm talking very small cabin, on our property. And we'd come down for a week a month. And we finally bit the bullet in late 2010. We sold out of Sydney, and we basically lived in the cabin for 18 months while we built our home. And that was challenging. There was no workspace. So you'd get up and you'd have breakfast. You'd clear away the breakfast dishes because the table became your desk. Your internet was all a little kind of smart modem thing that I had at the time, which you had to use sparingly because there wasn't that much data. So you learned how to be very prudent with your internet usage. And I also initially still travelled a lot. I had to get the Eastern Seaboard and over to Adelaide occasionally for a bit of work. So we gave Rex Airlines a good workout for the first few years.
And you were mentioning before about Sydney becoming untenable, and I think a lot of people, especially COVID, are seeing that more and more. Properties on the south coast or north coast of Sydney, and same in southeast Queensland, is just booming. You've been back to Sydney a few times, or I know you come back to Sydney a lot. Is the decision you're still set on your decision? It was the best thing to do? You've seen Sydney just keep getting worse?
Look, don't get me wrong, mate. I think we both love Sydney. We were avid fisher folk up there, and nothing beats launching your boat
Hawkesbury River
into the Hawkesbury before sunrise and belting along that beautiful bit of river, or flying under the harbour bridge just as the sun comes up over Fort Denniston. It's a truly magnificent place. There's no doubt about it. There's a whole bundle of things you miss when you shift to a place like this. First and foremost, mate, it's food. It's taken us a while to hunt out the handful of really good restaurants. Definitely miss that. And the other thing, now that we're getting on a bit, both in our 60s, and this didn't dawn on me at first, Mark, was the issue of medical care. So, things that you take for granted in Sydney, if ever you suffered an injury or a stroke or something, there'd be a hospital close by with a rehab unit not too far. You can't guarantee that in places like this, mate. So a dear friend of ours, her husband had a stroke. They ended up having to live up in Canberra for 6 or 8 weeks while he did his initial recovery, and then had to go to Moruya, which is 2 hours north of here, for rehabilitation for 3 months. Now, that is so difficult on a family, So we are fortunate, though, that the government's built Bega Valley Hospital, which is a major undertaking, and it's going to be the medical hub of the region. So medical services are getting better, notwithstanding COVID, of course. But that's about it, mate. And I mean, you miss your mates, but mates are only a Zoom call away or a quick trip to Sydney. And believe us, mate, we get plenty of freeloaders down here.
I bet. And I think touching on that one of the complaints you often hear of people who have done a sea change or tree change is that the community that they actually move to is just so very different to being in the city. And and as you just said then, if it's the medical emergencies, it's the stories you hear are basically the whole community rallies around you.
And look, it's one of the things down here, mate. We live just near the little seaside village of Tarthra. We're spitting distance from it. And the community is just incredibly welcoming, open, friendly, bend over backwards to help you. They've got great Lions Club that I'm a part of. It's a very easy place to fit into if you know how to get on with people. And I think the other thing, both Wendy and I, we like the country life, mate. I was born in the bush up in Dorrigo, and we only ever left there when I was injured as a toddler. And I've always had this kind of heartfelt desire to get back to some form of country life. And Wendy just loves living on the property with the gardens and the space. And, from sun up to sundown, I almost never see her inside the house.
Yeah, because it's definitely want to touch on that later, because I know you both work together at times, but retirement is a challenge for being now 24 hours a day. And but one of the things is, yes, people wouldn't realise, but yes, you had an injury, you're in a wheelchair, but I've never seen that ever stop you. But that must have brought its own challenges for both of you, thinking, well, we're going to move on to a farm. Is there anything that sort of surprised you, or that transitioning into that was difficult?
No, not really. I mean, it can be very frustrating, particularly because our place is a bit slopey. It's not a nice flat acreage. We've got 12 acres. Half of it's wooded, half of it's kind of gardened and lawns. And there's just jobs that I can't do. It's as simple as that,
Yeah.
So we have a bloke who comes and does yard work for us a day a week. But there's still a hell of a lot I can do. I've got the ride-on lawnmower. I've got a bobcat that I use. We've got a little 6x4 utility vehicle, so I'm in the bobcat loading the mulch and Wendy's racing around dumping it. So it's surprising what you actually can do. And the place is well set up for us. I think one of the real tips I give to everybody, 50s plus, when they're thinking about where they're living, particularly if they want to stay there, it's inevitable that your physical mobility is going to decline over time. And obviously, having spent a lifetime in a wheelchair, I'm very aware of that fact. But most guys like you, Mark, who are 6'10" and bulletproof and can ballroom dance your way to heaven and back, it's the last thing you're thinking about.
Yeah. But
I urge all my similar age peers, think about where you're living. You really don't want stairs. You really don't want those little obstacles that are trip obstacles, like that ledge you stump your toe on every time you go to the bathroom late at night, or the sliding door ridge that you've got to step over, and when you're 76 may become a trip hazard that ends you in hospital with a broken hip. And these things, if you plan in advance, particularly if you're doing a new build or a renovation, are easily dealt with at virtually no cost and a little forethought.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because my in-laws had lived in a terrace house, townhouse, I should say, and their bedroom was upstairs. So even in their 80s, they were walking up these stairs, and it made Anne-Marie, my wife, just say, that's it. We're never going to have our bedroom on the top floor, upstairs, because eventually, if this is the house you want to retire and live in your old age, you just don't want stairs. It's absolutely number one tip. And people don't think of that, because they want their house, they keep doing it up, they're renovating it, they do. But having a bedroom upstairs, you will soon get very sick of walking up and down those stairs. Wendy, for yourself, Chris was just saying about enjoy the gardening, the farm. How has the transition been to being on the farm for you?
Pretty good, actually. When we first came down here, I was only working part-time. So from word go and from the clearing we had to do for the home, there was always stuff to be done in the garden, which I've always liked, always loved plants. I find it a really nice pastime and something I enjoy doing. I mean, one of my favourite things to do is split wood on our wood splitter. I find it really relaxing and something that I can do for a couple of hours, and you feel good because you've got a pile of wood for your fireplace at the end. But, I find it pretty calming to do something like that and just hang out in the garden the same. We've got a big veggie patch, which I spend a lot of time in. We change that seasonally, what we've got in there. We've recently put in a nice rose garden, which I love. I've always loved roses.
Yeah, same here.
And it's an opportunity, I guess, to get away from Chris for that time, because I can go out in the garden and spend a few hours out and then come back in.
Yeah, okay. It is something that I do talk to people about, and you do need exactly what you just said then, time apart. Yeah. And I know you at different parts of your life work together in your own businesses, but yeah, do you consciously just say, yep, we just need our own space sometimes?
Yep. Oh, I know I do. I think Chris does as well. He's happy to play a computer game and get away from me that way, whereas I'd much rather go out in the garden and do something. But, since the early 90s, we've basically worked together a lot, except for when he first started with Invacare, and I was still working then for Dynamic Living Designs and Setting Dynamics. So, we didn't work together all the time then, but then I started working for Invacare as well, especially when he got asked to go up to Asia, to Hong Kong. I went with him, but I was still working in Sydney, so I'd fly in and out. So I'd do a week on, 2 weeks off, a week on, 2 weeks off between Sydney and Hong Kong. So we still worked together a lot then. So I guess we've done that for a long time. So to me, changing to retirement or coming down here, that sort of didn't change a lot from what we were doing previously.
But I do think it's something couples, especially post-retirement, if you've had your separate jobs or separate careers, we do see it's not just the finances when it comes to retirement, and you've touched on it yourself, your health is so important, but it's also the relationships that you do need to work out. Well, you're now going to be with each other 24 hours a day. How are you going to do that? Are you going to have your own hobbies, own mates? And all that's good, but you do need to actually think about this, because I've seen some people who are just lost and then just basically follow around like a puppy, the other person who's already got their life in order. So it's something that just definitely needs to just be thought about because it is a transition.
Well, Mark, I have a relative who worked well into her 70s. Because the last thing she wanted to be was stuck at home with a husband.
And that's right. But at least as long as you recognise that and look at it, because I know so many people are focused on, I need such and such amount of money to retire on, or I'm going to be till such and such date, say 65, and then the day after you're 65, I retire. Well, now what do I do? So it is worth spending some time on. I wouldn't mind actually going back a little bit to actually maybe 5-10 years before. Actually, when you said you first saw that farm that was for sale, did you actually start thinking from then, okay, I can actually see this goal, it's sort of light at the end of the tunnel of when I'm actually going to stop work? So maybe 5-10 years out, what were you actually thinking? Okay, we've got to get this in order. Yes, we need to look at the amount of money or where our investments are to see, will we actually have enough to live on? What were your sort of thought processes leading that 5-10 years up to retirement?
Mate, it's funny because, as I mentioned before, I've been a real opportunist in life. Most of the jobs I took and opportunities I got, weeks before they appeared, I hadn't really thought of them. My time up in Asia, I was given 24 hours to decide if I wanted to go and run the American business up in Asia. It was an opportunity, and I thought I'd never want to be sitting back worried about, gee, what if? So buying the block of land down here was another opportunity, an adventure. No real plans. At the time, we still had a very significant small business, which was I was a partner in, that was highly profitable and yielded very good dividends. So that kind of propped up any lifestyle issues. Plus, I was consulting and generating an income. So, happy days. Let's see where the adventure takes us, really. I think more and more it became, in those years, that we would come down and spend a week here or 3 weeks at Christmas, and we just started to really feel sad going back to Sydney.
Yeah.
We'd started to meet people by then too.
Yeah.
So we'd make friends.
Yeah, we'd made a few mates down here, and I had two brothers down here initially. So it was then that we kind of took the biggest gulp, which was selling out of Sydney. Because once you sell out of Sydney, the chance of you clawing your way back to anywhere near what you had is probably none and Buckley's. So that was a big call, 2010, and embarking upon building a house, because anyone who's built a house that is to your spec, not just a project home that Builder X knocked up for you, and you try to develop, in our case, probably 3 acres of gardens. That's no small mean feat, mate. And I remember just before we sold our house, sitting up in the cabin with Wendy going, do we really want to do this? Do we really want to commit the next 5+ years? And it wasn't 5+, it was probably 10 years to building this house and creating these gardens out of nothing. Because the way the bushfire laws work now, mate, you've basically got to clear 50 metres downhill and 20 metres to the east and 20 metres to the west and 30 metres uphill. So we got a moonscape with a house in it.
Yeah.
And to turn that around has taken a lot of blood, sweat and tears. But you get the payback for it. I mean, people come down here now, mate, and we've still got a little bit to do at the top of the block, but pretty much everything is as we'd like it.
I think it really is helpful to understand, the challenges, because I think a lot of people do have this romantic notion about a sea or tree change. But yes, you really do, to make it work, have to put in a lot of hard work, because I think also that point you made about once you do make that commitment to sell up out of Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne, it's very hard to get back in.
Yeah, 100%. And also too, I as I said before, I love Sydney dearly. Hand on heart, mate, I could not live there.
Yeah.
It's just too much of everything. Mainly congestion.
Yeah. Did you have a preconceived idea? Because it is important, because, obviously to get this, to buy the farm, to fix it up, does take money. Did you have a preconceived idea, okay, while we're in Sydney, we're living off, I don't know, $1,000 a week or $4,000 a month, 100,000 or 50,000 a year? Did you have sort of when you're staying to think, okay, we're going to move, what do we really need? And if I need 50,000 a year or 100,000 a year, I need $1 million, or what was your thinking on that side of it?
At the time, I say we had a very successful business that I owned a third of, and that gave us a sense of security. And we continued to invest in our super fund, which was growing steadily. But really, it was our business interests that were the main source of comfort and confidence. Then another big D-Day happened about 6 years ago now, when our business was essentially poached from us. So we're an importer distributor, and a major foreign multinational bought our 2 biggest suppliers, who accounted for probably 3/4 of our revenue. And they basically tapped us on the shoulder and said, right, you'll give us your business for a few shekels, or we'll take it. We'll cut off your supply line. And that was really confronting. And that's when I started to become very concerned, because I was reaching very much the end of my desire to work long and hard and really put the shoulder to the wheel for any cause. And I wanted to back off. And I thought, what if just now when I want to back off, I lose my one source of income? And the best thing that happened to us was I've always had very good tax accounting advice, mate. So I've sold a couple of businesses, two businesses. And in the corporate world, I acquired several. So I've had quite a bit of mergers and acquisition experience at a small to medium level. And getting your structures in place, we were able to sell our business and basically legitimately paying no capital gains tax because of the structures we'd established, the length of time of the investment, et cetera, et cetera. And that gave our super a big shot in the arm. I continued to do consulting work. In fact, tried to ramp it up a bit at first. And as you would know, Mark, from my spreadsheets that I send you, I fastidiously track my wealth to debt month by month. And I wanted to do that to prove to myself I wasn't going down the tube. We had a period when Wendy and I went into our first business, Dynamic Living Designs. I chucked in a job as IKEA's national IT manager, and Wendy was quite a senior theatre recovery nurse or practice manager nurse back then. You know, so we were making good money, mate. And we chucked it in to go into this new small business. And as always, the business took a lot longer to become profitable than we'd hoped or planned. And all of a sudden, we looked at our bank accounts and we were in strife because we hadn't cut our cloth to suit. And we learned that time a major lesson in how to live prudently when your income dries up. And it served us in good stead a couple of times in life because, it's really about adjusting your expenditure to not exceed your income.
Yeah, that really is a good point because, and sometimes you just need to actually live through it because, and people just in life are going to make mistakes or be caught unawares. It's just how you learn from them that is the main point. You're actually saying that, and I've always known, as you said, you love your spreadsheets. You're very fastidious in knowing exactly where your financial position is in. What I see for a lot of couples is usually one of the couple is interested in the finances in that and the other one isn't. But it really is, for me, from my experience, for both to be absolutely fully aware of what their situation is. I know, Wendy, whenever we had these meetings, it was always you and Chris were at the meetings. And I know you weren't as interested as Chris were, but you always felt, no, I needed to understand what's going on.
Yep. I think he's always taken the charge on that side, which is always, fine with me. So, yes, I've always known where we are. I'm probably not as much a warrior as Chris has been over the years. So even from when we started DLD those years ago, my biggest thing was I was still nursing back then and didn't want to give that up. So I was working in both businesses until it just became too hard because I was doing 7 days a week. And, when I was nursing, I'd do 12-hour shifts at times and Chris would be ringing me up saying, you've got to come home, you can't work like this. But I really missed that at first, but he sort of always taken more of the charge on where our finances have been or going to be. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's no problem one taking an interest in the other not. It's just what we try and talk when we talk to our clients is that, no, you just need to be aware of that, even if you don't have that much of an interest. And I also should say, to exactly the way you do it, Chris, and month by month looking at this, a lot of people think, well, hang on, that's budgeting and I don't want to budget, and that has negative connotations. But to me, it's actually, no, you're actually understanding your position and you're actually feeling like you're in control. And that's all a really good plan or any really good financial situation is just feeling in control of your money and knowing where it's going. Because as you've run small businesses, if you're not in charge of your own cash flow, you won't have a business very soon after. So I think it's a really important point. Having control of your finances and knowing what they're doing month to month isn't budgeting, isn't being strict on your expenses or missing out. It's just having an understanding and being in control.
Yeah. Well, it's like Dynamic Living Designs when we started it. We'd always make sure, because Chris and I'd sit down at the end of the month and do all the bill paying and, the salaries. We'd always make sure all the staff were paid first. And then basically we were on very little wages for the first year, 12 months, 15 months for that time. So we did have to budget to allow us to live on what we were able to pay ourselves, because we wanted to make sure that all our suppliers were paid and our staff.
Yeah, and that's for any small business, it's just the reality of it. You need to get established, you need to get started. When you actually looked at for your own retirement, for how much income you actually needed to live on, did you feel it was a big drop you were going to have to make in retirement, or the income you had pre-retirement, no, we wanted to keep that type of lifestyle? How have you found that?
Well, mate, we don't have a particularly exorbitant lifestyle. If it hadn't been for COVID this last couple of years, we would definitely have done more domestic and international travel. So that's money that's gone unspent. We love to duck out for a feed, but the Tathra pub or the Magnificent Eden Chinese restaurant are as good as any, and they don't cost a fortune. I enjoy a good wine, but I don't drink Grange every night. So our lifestyles are really relatively simple, and we've had to make no real adjustments up, down, left or right. The fact of the matter is we're an established couple, mate. We're not the young married going out with yet another car to buy or yet another bed for the next kid that's coming along. That's all behind us now. There isn't much we need. In fact, if anything, we probably need less. So it's really about now probably having sufficient funds to do those lifestyle things while we're still young enough and capable enough to do it and enjoy it. I'd dearly love to get to the US and buy a car and just drive one side to the other and amble around the States. That's something I'd love to do. I'd love to get back to France, and instead of travel around anywhere, I'd just like to get a villa somewhere for 3 months, and just soak up another culture. It's one of the things we loved so much about being in Hong Kong for those 2 years was immersing yourself in a completely different place, even as westernised as Hong Kong was. And sadly, I was about to move to Tokyo when I threw that job in, and I think that would have been fantastic. So that's probably our big expenditure on the horizon. We've done pretty much everything to the house that we want to do. Although with rural properties, there's always an upkeep.
Yep.
It's my asphalt driveway is about 10 years old now. It needs resealing. It's not like resealing your driveway at home, Mark.
Yeah.
It'll be probably a 30 grand plus bill. But that, that's what you save for at times to be able to undergo that maintenance and keeping your place looking nice.
Yeah, and I think you've made a really good point there that I talk to clients about, is that retirement isn't one lot. One lot of period of time. It's actually broken up into smaller pieces. And just exactly as you said, for the both of you, you'd like to travel, go to America, spend 3 months in Europe, those sort of things. And really those first 10 years after you stop is usually when most people do that. There's the next stage of where, okay, we've had enough of the travel overseas, or that's out of our system. Now we're really enjoying being in our local area and just staying there. Not as much, you get sick of airports, but still enjoying the travel, but maybe it's more local. But then there's a third stage where it's, we all have to look, is staying on a farm going to be the most realistic thing, or do we need to look at retirement villages, or retirement villages now like holiday resorts, or worse, aged care, not worse, I shouldn't say, but if medically you need aged care. So I think people should realise that, or now start to see with retirement, it's definitely broken up into blocks of periods of time.
100%. And I suppose there's one thing I'm dreading, and Wendy and I have talked about this. It's when we say, righto, the property's just too much for us. And we'll also reach a phase where we've kind of been there, done that. But my great unknown is where to? Because when you've lived on 12 acres where you can hardly see a neighbour, and the air's really clean and there's space, and the only traffic, well, you don't get traffic noise, you get bird noise and frogs and the odd red-bellied black snake trying to get his way into the laundry. I kind of dread the idea of having neighbours or, apartment living, or even high-rise penthouse with a beautiful view. I really don't know how I'd cope. And I think probably what we will do down the track is some extended rentals. So winter down here, it's not the temperature, it's the short days that gets to me. So we normally shoot through somewhere for 2 or 3 weeks. I think next year we might go to somewhere like Cairns or Darwin and spend a month or 2 there and get an apartment and actually try and experience some of that different lifestyle, albeit very short term, before I made any set decisions, whether we should go and buy a home somewhere nice like Port Stephens or Lake Macquarie, or down around Wollongong, or we should go and look at a lovely high-rise, up on the Tweed, overlooking some nice beaches of water. I don't know. I think I'd want to dip my toe in first and try it to see how bearable I find the lifestyle.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice, because there's a saying, you'll take me out of here in a box, and I've definitely experienced with parents and in-laws that it's something you really do need to just accept. One day, you will need to change, and it's better to be prepared, or have at least some idea of what may be the alternatives. Is there any other probably tips, or now that you have made this transition, retirement or life goals that you think, that would help anyone listening to, that you see you should contemplate or think about?
Mate, particularly for people like me. I mean, I used to have a senior executive role. At one stage I probably had 150 odd people in the business I was running, so it was reasonable size. I had some pretty senior staff reporting to me. I was on and off more aircraft than most people have had hot lunches. And it's very exciting. And the sort of things that used to stimulate me were leadership, being part of a great team, building a great team, developing other people. So the kind of human resources side of being a business leader. I always enjoyed finance. And I was lucky in that I was able to wean myself off it. Many people are not in that position. So after I had my sabbatical, I was headhunted to build an industry association from the ground up, which was a lot of work, and at times very lonely work, but it was for an industry that I believed in deeply and dearly. And so I led that for 9 years, and I still do a little bit of work there as an advisor, So I had that joy of being able to wean myself off a lot of those kind of corporate experience, positive drug vibes you get. That one of the things I've also done, which I would really encourage any of your listeners who have led senior executive roles or any role really, consider getting involved with a really good charity, a really good not-for-profit. Because a lot of those skills that you used in corporate life are wanting in the not-for-profit sector. Marketing skills in particular, financial acumen, investment skills. So you can actually bring some of what used to really excite you and still experience it and also give back at the same time. So I currently am president of the Physical Disability Council New South Wales, and they are the peak systemic advocacy body for physical disability. Now, that's a whole lot of big words to say that we fix things. So we engage with New South Wales Transport about the public transport system, about rules for motorised mobility devices, about motor vehicle mods for people with disabilities. We engage with New South Wales Health, trying to develop a health passport for people with disability to streamline their experience in engaging with the public health system. We talk to Ticketek about building more friendly ticketing systems so that I can book an accessible seat when I want to go to the theatre. So we engage with business and government extensively to make things better. And it's some of the best work I've ever done, mate, and most fulfilling. And it brings me back to using those skills of developing people, building teams, strategic planning. How do you juggle all the short-term imperatives with your long-term goals? All the complexity of good business. And at the end of the day, you're actually doing some good in the community. So I think it's a great option for retirees to consider.
Yeah, and it's keeping you busy, keeping you fulfilled. And as we've seen the last couple of years, you can do this remotely.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the industry association I set up, at the end of the day, industry associations are fundamentally advocacy or lobbying groups. I did 95% of my work from a desk.
Yeah.
You know, phone, email and research. That was what it was all about. And, you know, when you had to get in front of someone, well, sure, you did. And it was harder back then because tools like Zoom were nowhere near as evolved, you know, and people were still struggling to come to terms with Skype.
Yeah. And for yourself, Wendy, I know with your nursing career and a few other careers you had, how easy for you was it to sort of say, yep, I've stopped that or reduced that to what you're doing now?
I probably miss nursing more than I missed working full-time doing admin, which I've been doing. So I at the moment are doing about 40 hours a month admin work.
Right.
Which I do like doing, and I love the people we work with and the companies that we do some work for. But then I also spend a lot of time being outside. So, doing stuff in the garden and things. Yeah. So I haven't found, I don't think I've found it as hard as Chris finds it.
Yeah. And you keep busy.
He does do his advocacy work.
Yeah. But you always kept busy and you're keeping busy now.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the other day I fed our natives, I spread 160 kilos of fertiliser. It took me 7 hours. So, you know, at the end of that day, I come in and I feel like a glass of wine and sitting down that I've done something really nice. And then 2 weeks later, you have a look outside and think, oh, wow, it looks fantastic.
Yeah.
So I find that really fulfilling. So
totally agree.
Yeah.
This has gone past really quickly, so I do think I've kept you long enough. So I might just, apart from thanking you, one of the things we do ask people who join the show is what we call our final bite, and it's what's, say, the best piece of advice you've ever heard. Doesn't have to be financial, just anything that you've heard over the years that you would like to share.
My dad told me many years ago, don't be a follower and be true to yourself.
Yeah.
And I think I've done that.
I know you, Wendy, and no, I totally agree. You've done exactly that. Your dad proud. Well, Chris,
Mate, I'll give you two if I can cheat. But both from my dear old dad. When I first got my first job, he said, "Righto, you've got to save 20% of every pay packet." And I had no idea why. And he sat down and gave me chapter and verse about how you need new tyres on your car sometimes, or you've got to fix that chipped tooth, or something goes wrong with the stove and you need to buy a new one. And haven't always been able to save 20% of my pay packet, but I've always endeavoured to save something. And if it meant cutting back on something, well, I did. And that really aided me over the years. The other bit of advice he gave me was always leave something better than when you found it.
That's excellent. I must admit, we've done a few of these podcasts now. I've really quite enjoyed hearing that. And, a lot of it is from parents and some of the comments. And I think that there's some excellent tips there. Well, Chris and Wendy, it's been really good having you on. And just thank you again for being part of the Bite from the Money Sandwich.
Mate, I tell you, I love that book that you wrote. Really good read. Fantastic advice for, I think, any investor from any age up, but particularly 40s and 50s up. It puts things in very common sense terms and gives some great tips. So all the best to you, and thanks for letting us come on your podcast.
Thank you, Chris and Wendy, and thanks for the plug. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So long, mate.
Well, I hope you found that of interest, especially those contemplating retirement and possibly a sea change for themselves, as there is a lot to consider. As Chris kindly endorsed my book as well, The Money Sandwich, at the end there. Just a reminder, it is now available on our website, themoneysandwich.com, as well as any major online retailer. See you next time when we take another bite from the Money Sandwich.